Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. In Washington this week, CBC News is reporting that Prime Minister Mark Carney raised the prospect with Donald Trump of reviving Keystone XL. This is an oil pipeline that would run from northern Alberta to the United States. It's news that the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, was very happy to hear.
I think that that's a positive. That what I had told Prime Minister Carney when he came in is stop threatening to sell the U.S. less energy and let's promise to sell them more, because I think that's the pathway to a solution, and it seems like that seems to be the nature of the conversation. So I'm actually quite pleased.
This isn't the only pipeline on Premier Smith's mind. She's been pushing both the Prime Minister and the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby, to get on board for one that would extend westward from Alberta to BC's northern coast. There are still a lot of unknowns and questions around industry buy-in on the mega project and whether Mark Carney will actually give it the green light. The Premier, David Eby, has criticized this proposal, calling it fictional. Premier Smith responded by calling his comments un-Canadian. Here's David Eby this week on CBC's Power and Politics.
What I have right now is a minister from Alberta who is going along to First Nations along the coast of British Columbia and saying that Alberta is going to be building a heavy oil pipeline through to their communities, which they see as an existential risk. There is an oil tanker ban off the coast for good reason.
David Eby isn't alone in his criticism of this potential pipeline. Marilyn Slett is the elected chief of the Heiltsuk First Nation and the president of Coastal First Nations and joins us now. Chief Slett, good morning.
Good morning.
You wrote a statement rebuking Danielle Smith's proposal, saying, in your words, you had fought to keep crude oil tankers out of our territorial waters for over 50 years, and this stance is not a decision we take lightly. Why is that?
Well, our communities are at the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest, which is one of the world's last remaining coastal temperate rainforests. And the Great Bear Rainforest is uniquely Canadian. It is our home, and it's also a global ecological treasure, and it is no place for oil tankers.
Danielle Smith called you before she made this announcement proposing this pipeline. Is that right?
One of her ministers called the Monday, 2 days before the announcement.
And what was that conversation like?
Well, it was short, and it was a cold call. I don't know any of the Alberta ministers. She had mentioned that they were going to be making an announcement, and they were calling. I felt like it was like random First Nations on the coast, and just saying that they were making an announcement, and they didn't want to make that without making these phone calls.
So was there any talk of consultation? I mean, they're letting you know, giving you a heads up that the announcement is coming, but was there talk that we should discuss this and look at how to figure out how to move forward together?
She had mentioned that there would be some engagement, and, they were, just reaching out. I understand that their time frame between now and trying to get this project onto the national project list is quite slim. So, yeah, I mean, our concerns is that's, definitely not a lot of time to consult with multiple communities.
What conversations have you had with Premier David Eby about this?
We have certainly reached out to Premier Eby. The oil tanker moratorium is something that we fought for decades and, would like to see it maintained. We see it as good public policy that, protects this region. And, yeah, I felt like his comments and have been supportive and, very appreciative.
Is your sense that tanker ban is going to stay in place? Dawn Farrell, who is the head of the Major Projects Office, was grilled by MPs in the last couple of days, and she was asked whether there would be an exemption for the tanker ban. Her director, Sarah Jackson, said there's no automatic exemption for the tanker ban and said she couldn't speak about hypotheticals. Do you think that tanker ban is going to hold?
Well, I mean, for us, one of the reasons why we've supported it and why we think it should hold is there is, certainly no support from Coastal First Nations for a pipeline or an oil tankers project.
No support?
No support. No support from Coastal First Nations for a pipeline or oil tankers project. There is no technology that is out there that can clean up an oil spill.
And so for you, it's a non-starter?
For us, it's a non-starter.
There's polling that is out this week from the Angus Reid Institute. They talked to 1,673 people. This is online. Margin of error plus or minus 2 percentage points 19 times out of 20. But the poll says that 59% of Canadians say they support the idea of a pipeline running from northern Alberta to northwest BC, including 56% of BC residents polled. What do you make of that?
Well, we certainly understand the economic challenges Canada is facing. And, we are doing our part and we support major projects that are built in partnership with Indigenous people. Since signing the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement 20 years ago, we've built, an acclaimed made in Canada sustainable economy.
And so that does not square what you're saying. The economy that you've built does not square with the idea of a pipeline coming through.
No, it doesn't. I mean, it puts the bears. Our communities would bear the risk of an oil spill. My community had an oil spill in 2016, which we're still recovering from.
The context that conversation is happening in feels different than maybe in past, given threats from the United States and this renewed build Canadian, build baby build kind of idea coming out of the Prime Minister's office. How does that shape, do you think, the conversation that we're having and the discussion around pipelines? I just wonder whether the mood in the room is different now, do you think?
Well, the mood in the room, our people still depend on a healthy ocean for our food and our way of life. And, some of our communities on the coast source 60% of their diet directly from the sea. So our livelihood, our sustainability, our way of life, our economy, not just ours, but many of BC's economy, tourism, the fish food sector, rely upon a healthy ocean. That is not going to change. That remains the same.
What would you say, I'll let you go, but what would you say to Premier Danielle Smith? She says in some ways how Canada deals with this project will show whether the country works.
Well, if we're talking about nation building, it has to include everyone. And, sometimes when projects bear too much of a risk, that has to be taken into consideration.
Chief Slett, good to speak with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Marilyn Slett is the elected chief of the Heiltsuk First Nation and president of Coastal First Nations. In northwestern BC, the community of Kitimat is all in on natural gas. The town is home to Canada's first large-scale liquefied natural gas facility, the first major LNG facility in North America with direct access to the Pacific Coast and Asian markets. Phil Germuth is the mayor of the district of Kitimat and joins us now. Mayor Germuth, good morning to you.
Morning, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm well. What do you make of the Coastal First Nations president concerns around this proposed pipeline? She says it's a non-starter.
I get it. It's, the question, of course, that you mentioned, the poll that went out asked about a pipeline from Alberta out to BC on the coast, right?
Yeah.
But I think where the real difference of opinions or support comes in is what's in the pipeline, right? There's a huge difference, of course, between natural gas and, crude oil, if there happens to be an incident, right? Be it in marine transportation or be it on ground transportation, or land transportation. So I get it where they're coming from, and it's selling that product off. Of course, it's a very tough sell. Of course, if there was a way if we had a customer out there who wanted to buy Canada's, a value added, somewhat refined, of course, then there's much less of an environmental risk should something happen, right? And I think that's kind of what it comes down to on that.
Part of this is about creating buy-in, making sure, to her point, that everybody feels included in this. The LNG facility in Kitimat and the work that you did getting it there has been seen in many ways as a real opportunity and a roadmap for how that kind of relationship can be built. What did you learn from that experience?
Oh, we learned tons, actually, Matt. It's, having a good relationship with the proponent and having a proponent that wants that relationship right from the beginning. Their final investment decision wasn't until October 1st, 2018, but it was as far back as 2013 that we were working with LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink on, okay, if this project goes ahead, how do we make sure that in this small community, everything's going to go smoothly, right? So we had years of preparation and, of course, a very willing proponent that wanted to engage and wanted to consult. And they also had an excellent relationship with the Haisla Nation, of course.
You've said that this strengthened relations with Indigenous communities.
For natural gas?
Yeah, yes. This project did, yeah.
Yes, of course. They did a great job of going out and consulting. And again, I would say it's not the pipeline that's the issue. It's what's in the pipeline, right? I would suspect if the Coastal GasLink pipeline was an oil pipeline coming here, you wouldn't have had the massive amount of support that you did have for a natural gas pipeline feeding the LNG facility here.
Mark Carney has said that the Kitimat LNG project could be one of the big projects he's looking to expand. What would that mean for your community?
Well, they already have all the permits. LNG Canada is just doing trains 1 and 2 right now, but they already have the permits to expand up to trains 3 and 4. So they could start that anytime they like. So we're obviously, it's right from day one, that's been their plan, and that's been our hope too, that it gets to trains 3 and 4. Of course, Kitimat is also the location of the now canceled Kitimat LNG project that was, of course, run by Chevron and Woodside. And, so there's a permitted pipeline there, too, for another potential project. Enbridge now owns the rights to that pipeline and holds all the permits for it that they're keeping updated, et cetera. But, there's room here for another major LNG project, too, and we'll see what happens down the road.
Why do you think we as a country should be getting into the pipeline game right now?
Oh, I think it's a no-brainer, really. I think increased resource extraction and the great benefits that come with that economic are really a no-brainer in Canada. We want to fund our healthcare. We want to fund education. Our resources are the way to get that. And being Canada, we have some of the toughest environmental laws on earth. We've got some of the toughest labor laws around, and we've got some of the toughest consultation with Indigenous peoples regulations. So, we do things a lot better than a lot of other countries. And if these other countries aren't going to get the resources from us, they're getting them from somewhere else where they're not going to be, extracted as well and taken care of as well. So, I think this is something we should have been doing decades ago, but here we are.
How do you square that with the environmental concerns? People would say it's not a no-brainer because we're still we just come through another summer of fire across this country. And that when you look at increasing fossil fuel extraction, people believe that will lead to further disruptions in the environment. How do you square that?
I believe there's responsible ways to do it. Like I said, if they're not going to do it here, they're doing it somewhere else where it's much worse. So, a carbon, a CO2 molecule, it doesn't know boundaries or anything like that. Pollution doesn't know boundaries, right? So if we're doing things cleaner than other places and there's other countries that clearly want that product, whatever it may be, why are we not taking advantage of that and doing it in a very sustainable way? Kitimat, I think, is a great example of Canada, for example, for Canada, as our newly modernized Rio Tinto smelter is now producing the greenest aluminum anywhere in North America. Of course, LNG Canada has the lowest carbon footprint of any major LNG facility on Earth. So I think Kitimat's a great showcase for Canada of how to get it right and how to do it right. So, yes, we should be taking advantage of that when we can.
Before I let you go, the Premier of Alberta says that she wants this pipeline to the BC coast. Would you like to see another pipeline come from Alberta into your community?
It depends what's in the pipeline.
Yeah, that's for you. That's the bottom line. Is it depends what's in the pipeline.
I believe that's the bottom line for a lot of people. Like we've seen, like LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink did a great job of getting support for their gas pipeline coming here, right? Kitimat LNG also had support from 16 First Nations. So, I believe the product in the pipeline has a lot to do with the support you're going to get.
Phil Germuth, we'll leave it there. Good to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Phil Germuth is the mayor of the district of Kitimat, British Columbia. Dennis McConaughey is a retired TransCanada pipeline executive. He was part of the development team for the Keystone XL pipeline system. He's written several books about Canadian energy and climate policy. Dennis, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Should Canada be building more pipelines right now?
Canada should absolutely be taking advantage of its opportunity to increase heavy oil sands production and sell it over the next decade.
Why now?
Well, over the next decade, Alberta oil sands resource has the capacity to add 1 million barrels a day of production, I believe. So just to put that into context, today Canada produces already between 4 and 5 million barrels a day, of which about now 80% of that already is oil sands oil. The ability to expand that by another 1 million barrels is the driving force for a great deal of this momentum for finding an infrastructure solution to get that incremental production to market. And whether that is off the West Coast or revival of KXL is driven by the significant economic value that can be captured there. So this issue will never go away for Alberta. But whether it can happen or not, relative to either route, is a subject of a lot of different pros and cons, which I'm sure you'll ask me about.
Do you think Keystone XL is really back from the dead?
Well, it can be, but let me emphasize one point that applies to either pipeline route. It's not going to happen unless the risks of existing Canadian climate policy are fundamentally changed. The people who own that resource will not undertake this expansion unless they're not confronting emission caps and they're not confronting the condition to have any oil that would fill up any incremental pipe to be, quote, decarbonized, which means trying to implement a system of carbon capture and storage of the attributed emissions from that incremental production. The cost of applying that technology, in my view, would be too onerous to make that viable.
The cost to some people of removing that technology would be catastrophic. We're in a climate crisis. And
we're not in a climate crisis. The point that needs to be understood here is Canada has a real simple choice, which is actually, I think, recognized by even the Carney government at some level. It can take the value. It can recognize that if Canada isn't producing heavy oil, some other part of the world will, with no net impact on global emissions. So, Canada has a really, and I think here the Premier of Alberta is correct, a fundamental choice of capturing value in a world where denying ourselves that opportunity may have no material impact on global emissions.
So just to be clear, in this country, if we're making these decisions, should climate be of any consideration?
Canada should have a rational climate policy.
What does that mean?
I don't believe it's ever had. That means that our standard of climate policy should be consistent with what our major trading partners are prepared to impose on themselves, and not be imposing more costs related to reducing climate emissions that only deny or frustrate present value from the ability to sell a product that is very valuable. And I mean, the point here as to why is oil expansion, whether it's through the West Coast or through Keystone XL, and they both have different challenges. And I'm one who probably would favor a revival of KXL relative to the West Coast pipeline, because I think it does avoid some of the concerns that you've spent, the last minutes having set out. On the other hand, reviving KXL may not be as valuable an option to Canada as the West Coast option, but that's to be decided primarily by those who own this oil, which are the producers of oil sands oil and the province of Alberta, who's the resource owner. But my point is, either way, the driving force of this value to be captured for Canada is going to be a major part of the debate about whether the Carney government is serious about building and capturing economic value in the context of a country that has had almost zero GDP growth for the last decade.
What do you do?
Much of which was because of the frustration of these kinds of infrastructure projects.
What do you do about the opposition that we heard from First Nations in British Columbia? You just heard them. They said they're not backing down. This is a non-starter, the idea to them of a pipeline going to their coast.
Two answers to you on that point. On what basis do we run this country relative to the massive economic benefit of going forward to all Canadians relative to a risk that is imposed by specific communities? And this is going to be a debate under all kinds of development projects. It always is. Now, as a country, we have to decide how much value we're prepared to lose to provide effectively a veto to local communities.
So you believe that if the country believes that it's in the national interest, if the Prime Minister believes it's in the national interest, something like the tanker ban should be stricken off the books?
Absolutely, unequivocally.
What happens to the rights? If BC is a signatory to UNDRIP, which protects the rights of Indigenous people, what happens to those rights?
Well, so we're going to have a debate about what are their rights in a jurisdiction, where the land claims are not as settled as in other parts of Canada. And this very point is one of the reasons why I welcome a revival of KXL, because it is a fundamentally different circumstance relative to how much of that project is in the U.S. And another point I think should be remembered here is back in 2013, when Northern Gateway, which is essentially what is being revived in the West Coast Pipeline, the national regulator of the time signed off on the tanker spill risk. They signed off on the net benefits to the country of that project. And that project was frustrated or denied proceeding at the 11th hour, which is in the late 2015, when the Trudeau government decided, being the government of the day, that in their judgment, the risks of an oil spill in that location was too high to bear. So we've lived with that decision. That may have to be reconsidered. Ultimately, the people that are democratically elected at the federal level are going to have to make a decision relative to these two options. Now, as I've emphasized, neither is going to occur unless there are fundamental changes of national carbon policy, climate policy. David
Eby says that this proposed Alberta to BC pipeline is fictional, in part because there is no backer right now. There's nobody who is funding a pipeline. Do those people exist?
Of course they exist.
Well, they don't exist right now.
That's utterly ridiculous. There are 5 to 6 major oil sands producers who are well aware of the opportunity of expanding their production. They are the people who will ultimately have to supply the credit. Now, this is a chicken and egg issue. If they think the risk of underwriting either of these pipelines is reasonable enough, they will come forward, and there will be pipeline entities like South Bow, like Enbridge, and others who will supplement what the Premier of Alberta has already done by basically having a placeholder of this project. So, there's a kind of chicken and egg thing. Now, you can go down that list from Cenovus to CNRL, etc. There's half a dozen of them, and they are a major contributor to Canadian GDP. And so, they are there, but the assessment of whether the risks of taking this on are reasonable or not starts with a reversal of Canadian carbon policy.
I have to let you go, but just before, we just have a few seconds left. Is your sense that public sentiment has materially changed on the subject?
Well, in the context of a country that has had zero GDP growth for a decade, it certainly should. I'll say that as a Canadian citizen. And in my own belief, in your own reference to this recent polling, I think people get that in a present value sense for Canada, seizing this value is something that I don't think it can rationally just ignore. But I will concede this is a major, difficult, heart-rending decision for the Carney government because I think they know all these facts. And that's why, in part, KXL Revival minimizes some of the harder trade-offs internally if that project can be made to go.
Dennis McConaughey, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Dennis McConaughey is a retired Trans-Canada pipeline executive. He was in Calgary. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.